Okay, so I think first is very clear that the government is very clear that look, we would want a bureaucrat in a sense to really be the boss of SEBI. First, second, you got perhaps one of the most experienced and one of the most senior most bureaucrat to be part of SEBI. And what is seniority? Well, currently he's a finance secretary, and from North Block he will come to Mumbai, which is where the SEBI headquarters is. Then he, in a sense, before the finance secretary, was heading DIPAM. What was DIPAM? DIPAM was the Department of Disinvestment, where massive amount, where the only job given to DIPAM was to create value in PSU stocks or PSU companies, which I think in last 4 years post-COVID, DIPAM has done brilliantly. He was also part of a lot of disinvestments, took LIC public, a lot of OFOs. He, in a sense, ensured that the market disruption remained weak. So over the years, I mean, he's met merchant bankers, he understands the working of the market, he understands the working of the government. Now, if you get a private sector head as a SEBI boss, then they understand one part, which is that how markets function. If you get a bureaucrat who's got no market experience, then he understands how the government bureaucracy and the policy making does. Very few individuals in the system can perhaps claim that I know the market and I know the government bureaucracy and I come with experience and I'm coming from a positioning of power to something which is critical. So the fact that such a senior bureaucrat would be coming over, it clearly means that on a government standpoint, SEBI has to be fixed or something has to be changed, or big changes are coming.
Well, all eyes will be on this one as well. Tuhin Kanta Pandey, the new SEBI chief. Ashwin Parekh as well joins in on the show right now. We've got Shailesh Haribhakti too on the show with us. Gentlemen, good to have you both on the show. And Ashwin, like we were discussing, who better than Tuhin Kanta Pandey with his track record to actually be at the helm as the market regulator now?
True, absolutely. I mean, the kind of experience that he brings to this position, is absolutely going to be very important. A few things I would observe. I mean, when he's coming in into sort of, a position where there's a lot of expectation, from every quarters, every stakeholder associated with the markets. I mean, on one side, you have a large number of retail investors who are suffering at the moment on account of the market kind of bearish conditions. On the other hand, you have intermediaries who are also suffering on account of the overhang of regulations. I mean, the regulations for the intermediaries in the last 3 years have really sort of, been a little onerous, I must admit. And then, of course, the third stakeholder, the most critical one is, of course, the players such as mutual funds as well. So all the stakeholders have now huge expectations, In the midst of that, the policy that SEBI has created of public consultation is an interesting one, which means that, Mr. Pandey, when he brings in a huge amount of experience, both of the market as DIPAM sort of, chair, and then now as finance secretary as well, I mean, from the revenue side. Certainly, I mean, I would certainly believe that he would rationalize. He would try and come in and look at the difficulties that the stakeholders are facing. That's one part. The second part is, if you will observe, I think a lot of new changes have happened on account of sort of somebody, I mean, either from the intermediary group or from the mutual fund group, or going wrong on compliance. And one bad apple sort of, will create a lot of additional regulations. So there has actually been an overhang of regulations, some bit of regularization or deregularization, sort of, and rationalization is really called for. In the midst of that, therefore, I would say, Mr. Pandey comes in, I mean, the most appropriate choice. He comes in with a lot of work to be done.
Very few individuals can perhaps have this entire, dual experience. They know how the government policy making and bureaucracy works, and they also know how markets work. I mean, very few people perhaps have experience of both in India.
Correct. And what a fantastic context has been created for him. As my friend Ashwin said, and I double click on that, there is need for a little bit of slowing down on the intensity of regulation. That is very, very clear. And he brings that kind of overall perspective to the table. But most importantly, the center and the state will have to push through a fair amount of capital market activity during the next few years. And that is where his experience at DPERM and the DPE and his experience as finance secretary, he has been so close to the budget making. This time, if you would have noticed, there was a complete lack of emphasis on disinvestment. And that is when the climate and the atmosphere will be created to actually go all out, finish the IDBI situation, get more and more of the disinvestment done. And particularly at the state government level, I see this activity becoming much more enhanced because there's no other way that the state governments can make their balanced budget or their reasonable deficit happen other than monetization of their assets and therefore capital market action and the disinvestment of some of the state PSUs. So it's a fantastic choice. I welcome him to SEBI's chairman's position, and I look forward to a fantastic next few years.
All right. Gentlemen, really appreciate your time. Shailesh Bhai, Ashwin Bhai, always a pleasure to have you on ET Now. Thank you for joining us.
Let's bring on board Sriram Subramaniam, founder and MD at InGovern, to talk about what he makes of this appointment. Give us your first thoughts on what you make of this appointment, because as we understand, a lot of other people were in the race to become SEBI chair, the likes of Ajay Seth, you had Pankaj Jain, Debashish Panda. Give us your initial thoughts right off the bat. What are you making of this appointment?
I think this is a good move. Basically, it brings in a person with a clean image who has, I would think, the confidence of the bureaucracy and the politicians and the government in New Delhi. And so from that perspective, it's a very good move. Let us see, the government also has set a target to disinvest some of the stakes in the public sector enterprises. Two is, since Tuhin Pandey is supposed to be a stickler for rules, I would think that there will be more focus on enforcement of current regulations and stricter, I would think, this is on the market participants. So, because there are a lot of violations now, given the bull markets, etc. So, one has to see that there will be greater enforcement actions, I would expect.
Okay, and just extending that thought, given his previous roles in the government, how do you think Pandey's background will now influence SEBI's regulatory approach? What changes or what differences in style could we see compared to the previous chair, Madhabi Puri Buch? Or if you could just draw a comparison between how you expect to see a difference in the influence that they will cause when it comes to SEBI's regulatory approach?
I hope there will not be any dramatic changes. Definitely, given that all the industry bodies would have had access to him, I think from that perspective, I would think at least corporate India should be happy, or at least should be reconciled to the fact that he will continue whatever changes SEBI has brought about under Madhabi Buch. So I think that is good, because it's not that he's going to be a bull in a china shop kind of a person who is going to rock the boat or anything. Continue the could have this one regulations that SEBI brought in. There were a number of changes that SEBI has recently brought in, including the T+1 kind of this one from a broking perspective, including financial inclusion, bringing in more REITs and smaller ticket sizes for mutual funds, etc. So there were a lot of positives. We just continue the positives. But of course, he knows the fact that many industry participants like foreign portfolio investors were greatly annoyed with the I would think the increase in short-term capital gains and are slightly unhappy. So maybe hearing out all market participants on the taxes, etc., maybe his influence would extend to the finance ministry and probably with some of these. So we've got to see how that linkage helps in the taxes that are collected, because at one end the STT was imposed, that is the securities transaction tax was imposed, saying that because there was no long-term capital gains in the UPA regime. But then now we have long-term capital gains and short-term capital gains and STT being collected. So this is something that market participants have been very unhappy with. I hope he listens to the market participants and goes back to the finance ministry with some suggestions on how this can be countered.
Okay.